in a given population, percentage of, or you can write percentage of females and males in the total population. Okay. Per 100 males. It can also be the otherwise. That's, so you will get to know what percentage. Let's say if there are in a population, there are 100 individuals, and then out of these 100, you know that there are 70 females, and so there has to be, you can here put total number or 100 individuals, then you know that it is 70% of females, so the rest is 30% is males, right? So very simplified way. You can also count it as, so this is one way, or you can also count it as the number of females per 100 males in that population. Okay, if the population is less than 100 itself that you are taking, then you have to go for counting the individuals and then figuring out the percentage. Both can be done. Apart from this, one another factor that defines whether the population will expand or be stable, one is the sex ratio. You should have a balanced sex ratio. So if you have very skewed ratio, which is like very few males or very few females, it will also affect how the population is going to behave in future. Another thing is age distribution, right? Organism just has their own age, but population has age distribution. So it is well, a population is composed of individuals of different ages. Okay, so percent individuals of a given age. So how we find it? We find it as percent. So we'll say that 20% of this population is below 20 years old. Let's say for humans, 60% is between 20 to 50, and then rest is above 60 years of age. So it's the percent individuals of different ages. Is that clear? Now, on the basis of this, if we know that the sex ratio is quite balanced, like if it is 70-30, 60-40, 50-50, these are fairly balanced ratios when it comes to the next generation. And with respect to age distribution, we make age pyramids. So what is an age pyramid? It's how we represent the data. It's called a pyramid chart. So a age pyramid chart will tell you, so there are three kinds. Let's say the black thing here, the black represents, so right in the center, when you go this side or that side, it is the extent, the number of individuals increase. Okay, so this black represents individuals in post reproductive phase. Post reproductive means which cannot reproduce anymore, correct? So their reproductive age is gone. Then we have this blue one, which I'm representing here. So this tells us about organisms which are still in their reproductive phase. Okay, and then I'll use, let's say, a green one to take individuals which have yet not reached reproductive age and they are pre-reproductive phase. So if you look at it, it looks like a pyramid, right? Correct? Do you understand?
Yes, sir.
So just looking at this graph, this data, can you tell me that what will be fate of this population? A population, let's say, which has around 10% of the total in post-reproductive phase, and then 40% in the reproductive phase, and the rest, let's say 60%, is in a pre-reproductive phase, and we made a pyramid that looks like this. So will it be a population which is going to expand, going to be stable, or going to decline? What kind of population is this?
Expand.
Expand. But don't you think that why it will expand? What is your rationale to say it will expand? Why will it expand? If you see, if I just ask you, 40% of people are individuals in the population are in reproductive phase. Rest 60 plus 10, 70 are still not in reproductive phase. So why do you still believe that it will expand? Come on, you just have to defend your answer, right? You gave an answer. What is it? Why do you think? You must have thought because of some reason, right?
Like the 60% will reproduce.
Will reproduce. They will not
Yeah.
reproduce. They are in pre-reproductive phase. They are
Like
kids.
they will.
They will in future, right? That's what your point
Yes.
is.
Yes.
Yes. So that's a very good way to analyze it. So you don't have to look at just the reproductive, you have to look what's going to happen. So let's say if you plus 10 years to this population, let's say, so in 10 years, majority of these are going to get into the reproductive phase. And even if some go into the post-reproductive phase, you will still have a population which is, you will still have a increasing reproductive population, right? So that's how we look at these pyramids and look at we just don't factor into the reproductive ratio or the reproductive component, but also the pre-reproductive, because they are going to get into reproductive later on, correct? And they are more than the reproductive. So till it looks like a real pyramid, okay, where the base is the widest, it is going to be an expanding population, okay? So that's correct. So it is a expanding population. Everyone understand why it's an expanding population?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So if I ask you, let's say this is 1, how will the graph of a declining population will look like? So let's again,
Post-reproductive will be bigger,
sorry,
larger.
sorry,
The number of people in post-reproductive would be larger.
the number of people in the post-reproductive will be larger. So you mean to say, yes, that's a clear cut. So you're saying that it will look something like this, correct?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yes, of course. So this is a population that is for sure going to decline because it looks like an inverted pyramid, correct?
Yes, sir.
But it does not have to be larger only to say that it is a declining population. Even if you find that the post-reproductive is, let's say, less and the reproductive is more, but if your pre-reproductive is also less, okay, then you know that over time it is going to be a declining population, correct? Because
Yes,
those who are in post reproductive, they are not going to contribute anything to the expansion or stability or decline, right? So you think So you understand that this black one is just there to kind of confuse you, or make you more you can be error prone just looking at this. So we know that these are going to convert into this, and this is going to convert into this, correct? Because these are the post reproductive ones, and this is less than the reproductive. So when reproductive will become post reproductive, very few pre reproductive will become reproductive, and their kids also will be like, what do you say, comparatively reduced. So this population, which shows a kind of this kind of shape, apart from something which is inverted pyramid, these both are going to be declining population. Do you understand why?
Yes, sir.
Yep. So if a question is asked where they give you numbers, so 10%, 40 and 60, you know that it is expanding, post reproductive, reproductive and pre reproductive respectively. But if they give you numbers here like 60, 40 and 10, it's for sure declining. But if the number is like 20, 60 and then 30, that's also going to be a declining population, if you take into consideration these three age groups. Okay. And what will be what will a stable population look like? Any idea? Again, post reproductive can be equal, okay, it's very fairly distributed. So something like this is a stable population, correct? But apart from this, a shape like this, because you remember post reproductive phase will now like die, they are not going to contribute, they're not going to become reproductive again. So even if the shape is like this, where the reproductive and the pre-reproductive are quite stable, what will happen to this population? So the shape here is, it's not exactly a pyramid, but it's like this, right? So this will also be a stable population, because you have to look at the ones which are in the reproductive and the ones which are in the pre-reproductive stage. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Stable population. So you can just draw these things. So this is how we get to know, knowing the age distribution of males and females and the sex ratio of males and females both. Shall I move forward? So sex ratio, age distribution, and birth rate and death rate. Apart from this, other attributes of population is size. So population size is a very important factor whenever we do take into consideration interactions or ecological studies, or the effect of predator or pesticide. We always see what is the change in the population size. Okay, so if a predator is hyperactive, the change in the population size of deers, or if the number of predator increases, the change of the population size of deer will be more bigger, and it will be in the negative, right? The deer population will shrink if there are more predators, correct? So what do you think is, what could be the size? So this population size also is referred to as something called population density. Number of individuals which are there per unit area because they will live in a space, right? They will occupy space. So you call it population size or population density, it means the same thing, and we designate it as n. N means the number of organisms. Okay, it can also be mostly we use number, but it can also be a decimal or a ratio. You can also you can also put it like that, or a factor, but mostly it's the numbers per unit area. So how do you think population density? What could be the lowest population density and highest population density? Any idea? So mostly the predators or organisms which are mostly at the top in the food chain in the ecosystem, and top consumers, they have low population size, correct? So in a jungle, you will see that there will be a comparatively very less predators like tigers if you compare to the number of deer or gazelles in that jungle, correct? And even more number of other smaller organisms like mouse or squirrels or something like that. So predators or top consumers are low in population size. Most of these big birds, they also are very less, but the population size can be also in millions for very simple or smaller organisms like crustaceans, fish, small fish, or even unicellular organisms like your algae, bacteria, etc. Okay, so it can depend, it can vary, one, on how fast the organism reproduces so that the number keeps growing on, and how less space it is taking in its environment. Okay, but we can, most of the time, population size or population density is not a very good measure to get to know what is the effect of the population on environment. For example, let me give you so if I say that there are 5,000 tell me any small plant, 5,000, let's say, tulsi plants, wild tulsi. You all know tulsi?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So 5,000 tulsi wild plants in the jungle versus 20 banyan trees in the jungle. So which one do you think will have more impact on the ecosystem and will contain more weightage? 5,000 tulsi plants, or in the same region, like in a 1 kilometer square, let's say, or 2 kilometer square also. So 5,000 tulsi plant versus 20 banyan trees, which will have a higher domination? Banyan tree or tulsi plant?
Banyan.
Right, banyan, because it's a very huge plant, and just 20 of them will outweigh 5,000 tulsi plants, even in terms of space and the role that they have in the ecosystem, right? So banyan tree has a greater role in that ecosystem, and it can affect. So if you cut 20 tulsi plants out of 5,000, it won't create such a difference that if you cut 2 out of 20 banyan trees, that will create, right? You understand what I'm talking about? The effect of that population, effect of each individual of that population. So with very big organisms, they also play a very major role in the ecosystem, and taking just one out. Same thing is for predators. So if you take 10 gazelles out from a landscape, that won't make much of a difference. But if you take 10 predators, like 10 tigers out of that system, it will make difference, correct? Because maybe there are just 50 tigers, and if you take 10 out, and tigers affect the ecosystem much more than gazelles do. Okay. So similarly, in case of very big organisms, instead of just the number or the density, we also look for one more parameter or attribute of population, which is known as the biomass. Okay. Biomass, or we call it the percent cover in terms of plants. So what is the coverage, percent coverage of that organism? So you can write down percent coverage or biomass is a more meaningful measure of the population where there are huge organisms in terms of size, where there are huge organisms in terms of size which play a significant role, in the ecosystem. Okay. And sometimes it is not possible to know the population size. For example, if I ask you, you have to figure out how many deers are in that one big, huge national park or a jungle. So do you think it's possible for you to count all the deers? What do you think?
No.
Then how will you figure out how many deer, or what is the, where we are not able to find population density or absolute population density or absolute population size? What are we going to do? How can we reliably produce a data of these populations? Because if we cannot do that, we cannot run a conservation program. We will not have any idea of what is under threat and what is thriving properly. So how will we do that? Any idea, people? For example, I ask you that I want to decide a policy of fishing in a very big lake. Okay, so there's a very big lake where I have to figure out what is the how many fish are there. Are there, is their population declining? Is their population okay? And I can allow fishermen to fish in that lake, or should I ask them to now stop for some time so that the fish population can come back? So how will I decide that policy? Is there a way that I can go on and count every fish in the lake and say that, okay, we have 20 million fish or 20 lakh fish in the river, in this big lake, so keep on fishing? How do you measure? If I simplify the question, if I ask you, in a park next to you, how many grasses are there? You can never count the number of individual grass plant in that park, correct? So what will you do? You cannot do anything, right? Can we do anything,
No.
people?
So
No?
like take a small area and then see how much grass is there, and then we can like
Extrapolate.
yeah.
Yeah, correct. Amazing. So beautiful. This is exactly what we do. When we cannot count the population, we make an estimate of the population, which is called relative density. So we have to calculate relative density, or which is called indirect estimation of the population size. Okay. And this is exactly what is done for most, not most, almost every ecological research purposes, or even like, you know, the a tiger reserve, or this project tiger, where we take the tiger census. Do you think we can go and figure out every tiger and count how many tigers are there? So these numbers that you get, that there are 1500 tigers, sometimes when it is exactly specific, you know, it is always comes with plus minus 10 or 20. So it's an estimate. Okay, so we know that in this area of like 10 kilometers square, we have this many tigers. So the rest of the jungle also might be having similar number of tiger. Okay, so it's called relative density. So we for the case of fish in a lake, I will just count or calculate the number of fish that comes out in one trap. So in the one fish net, how many fish do you get? So if you get enough number of fish in one fish net, which means that there are enough fish throughout the lake and you can continue fishing. If that number keeps decreasing, like if fishermen are coming and saying that we are getting less and less fish in every net from last 1 month, then I will look at the data and realize that, oh, the fish density is getting it's decreasing. So it's better we introduce more eggs into the water, or more, or I'll tell that then whenever you take the fish, if you see a female fish which is gravid, which means which contains egg, put it back. If you see very young fish, put it back, don't sell it in the market, only take the adult fish. Okay, so that way we can restore, or again grow let the population grow. Or we can put some food in that lake at different, whenever we are putting net in, before that we put some food also. So there are different measures that we take, and all these are on the basis of relative density calculation. So this is another attribute of population which is more practical and is used in population research, where we cannot count the population size or the absolute population density. Is that clear? So relative density, yes, relative density is an indirect measure of population population size. Okay, so that's there. Now another thing is, another attribute is population growth. Now size is how many, growth is with what rate that population is growing, correct? Now this parameter depends on other parameters that we have studied. More directly, it depends on the birth rate and the death rate. But do you think just the rate of taking birth and rate of dying, are these only two things that affect a population? So let's say I have a, use black. So there is a population density or relative population density. I call it N for any population. And this is a value that I have. Now what factors will affect this population? One, I know the factor that will, whatever will affect the population positively, I'll put an arrow. So this is a positive effect, and this is called birth rate, or I will call it natality. You know about mortality, natality, fatality. So natality is birth. Okay, birth rate. So births will affect the population in a positive manner, right? It will add to the population. So the overall population growth will be affected positive by the birth, and it will be affected negative. So I'll put this kind of a stop bar. So it will be affected negatively by mortality, correct? Or the death. Now these are individuals which are taking birth and dying, but the overall attribute of population density is being affected. So this is natality, and we denote it as, let's say, Population density is N, so we denote this as B, birth, this as D, which is death. Anything else that can affect this population density?
Yes, sir. People can migrate to other countries. You can reduce the population.
Yes, people or animals, everything. There could be emigration and immigration. Okay, migration is a broader term which contains both. So migration means moving from one place to another. Now you can be adding into the population. So one factor that will add positively to the population is if there is a immigration, correct?
Yes.
If more of similar kind are being added from different locations, they are being added. So again, it's a positive thing and we denote it by I. And similarly, what can hamper is negative in a negative way is emigration. So emigration is going out from that population, or E, correct? So if I have a population at any given time, so let's say at any given time, I have a population which is known as N at time T. So N is the population density at the time T. And I want to find what will be the change, including all these factors, of in that population at T plus 1. So whatever is T, let's say in year 2022 is T, then in 2023, which is T plus 1 year. So how will I do that? Nt plus 1 is equal to Nt plus what factors will add to it? B plus I, correct? This will add to it. Birth plus immigration. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
And I will subtract what? Death plus emigration from it. So this is the formula to calculate population density at time T equals 1, or the population density in the next generation. If this T is generation, in the next, if T is time, like year, in the next year. So this is write down formula to calculate population density at time T plus 1. This is always the next time. Is this clear to all of you? This will tell us, so this Nt plus 1 will tell us is the measure of population growth. So if this comes out in positive, this is a readout for population growth. Or population decline. So if this comes out to be positive, if Nt plus 1 is positive, it is growing population. If Nt plus 1 is negative, it is declining population. If Nt plus 1 is equal to Nt, so simply means all these factors are 0, right? Let me write it as Nt plus 1 is equal to Nt plus all of these I have taken as x. So Nt plus x, can I write it like this? Everything of this is x, the x factor. So if Nt plus 1 is equal to Nt, which means this factor is 0, it has no effect, it is a stable population. So the birth plus immigration is equal to death plus emigration. Nothing changes. So it's equalizing. If this is more than Nt, then this x is negative. It is taking something from, sorry, the x is positive. It is adding to Nt. That's why Nt plus 1 is more than Nt. which means it's a growing population. So birth and immigration is more than death plus emigration. That's why when we are subtracting, we are still getting a positive number to add, and NT plus 1 will be bigger. Similarly, in the same manner, NT plus 1 is negative if this X value is negative. So positive and negative will become negative, and you will take something out of this NT. So NT plus 1 will be less than NT, which means death and emigration is more than birth and immigration. So it's getting subtracted. Is that clear, everyone?
Yes, sir.
Yep. Okay, please write this down. Let me know when you are done. Done, everyone?
Done.
Okay, others? Those who are
Done,
done
sir.
can, yeah, okay. So shall I move forward, people?
Yes, sir.
Okay, now we are going to study some bit of mathematics, but it is simple. So you will just be with me. And so you understood this thing, how to calculate population growth, right? So let's talk about some population growth models. Okay, so next thing is population growth models, and pay attention. And if you do not understand anything, please do ask. So there are two different kinds of population growth. One is called exponential growth, and first we are going to do that in today's class. What do we mean by exponential growth? How many of you, so you all have studied, how many of you have maths still in 11th and 12th? Atif, right? Okay, Atif. So can you tell us what do we mean by exponential? What is exponent, exponential? What is exponential numbers or exponential graph?
The exponential numbers means like a very high number. So I think graph will be like the curve will be very narrow.
Very narrow. So can you give me an example of an exponential number series or exponential growth of numbers? a series of number which is exponential. You can say it is exponential.
Yes, sir. For example, if we take a number, let's say 2, and then raise it to 3, and we get a number, then again we raise it to 3, and we do that a lot of times like that.
Raise it to 3. Or you can just, if you can just keep doubling the number, right? If I take 1,
Yes, sir. You can
I
do
double it, 2, I double it, 4, I double it, 8, I double it, 16, 32, 64, and so on, correct? Is that exponential growth?
Yes, yes.
Yes. So can you see that this kind of growth actually happens? Where have you studied it? Theoretically, at least. This is how a bacterial population grows, isn't it?
Yes.
One bacteria divides and becomes 2, then these 2 divides and become 4, these 4 divides and become 8 and 16, 32, 64, so on. This is how bacteria multiplies in our body also, and that's how they can infect us. In a very small amount of time, they can grow till very long. Now, because this is in one cycle, it took just 1 became 2, very small number. The second cycle, this, third, fourth, fifth, but in the sixth cycle, from 62 it will become 128, and then 2, like it will just keep on doubling, and very soon you will see it will enter thousands and then 10,000s very fast. So exponential growth is where exponential growth is where the population grows in a geometric fashion. So this is called a geometric progression, correct? Those who have maths, those who do not have maths, we also call it the geometric growth or geometric fashion, correct, people?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, talking about again the formula. So now we are talking about growth. Now, what is growth? It is a change, correct? It's a change in the population. It's growing, so it is the change in population. Now, let's say we start with a population which is n. Let me say it is n naught. Okay. So n naught is the initial population with which we are starting, and we are making a model where we will see how it grows if it is an exponential growth. You can also write it n simply or n naught. I call it n naught because it's simple. It's easier to understand. If it is n naught, it is the initial population. Then at any given time, you can call it nt. And if you want to find it at the next time, you can call it nt plus 1. So these are just notations. So n or n naught, you can use n as well. Let's say n is the initial population, so not confuse you. And then the birth rates will be there, right? And death rates will be there, correct? So,
Yes.
so I'm keeping B as the birth rate. I'm assuming that migration is not happening in these populations, and even if it is happening, it is adjusted in the B. Sorry, immigration is happening, we will call it B. So these are the birth rates or also the inclusion rates. So whatever is getting added to the population. Then D is death rates or whatever is getting excluded from the population. Correct? Okay. But this, there is one thing here. So in growth models, it's not the absolute rate, because the number of population can be very, very high. Let's say if you're talking about bacterial population. So when we make models, we make a model which fits to any number, whether the population is low or high. So if this is the initial population size, n is the initial population size, B is the birth rates per capita, which means birth rate per capita of organisms. Okay. And this is death rate per capita. So we call it per capita birth rate and per capita death rate. If I say that the birth rate per capita is 2, 2 is the birth rate per capita, which means 2 individuals are added per 100 individuals in that population in the next generation. Is that clear? Is that clear, everyone?
So can
Yes.
you repeat the last part, please?
Yes, I can. So you have to ask, if I say that the birth rate per capita means this, the birth rate is 20 per capita. Okay, it means 20 individuals per 100 individual will be added in the next generation in that population, or in the next time frame in the population, in the next year in the population. So if the population size is 13,000 and the birth rate is 20 per capita, what do you mean? What do I mean by that? How many should I add? This is n. So what will be n plus 1 in the next year? If 20 is the 20 per capita, which means per 100, how many are there? 13,000. Do you understand? First I have to do 13,000 by 100. What is it? 130. 130 into 20. What is the number? 2,600, correct? So I will add 2,600 to this. So it will become 15,600 in the next, if 20 per capita is the birth rate. Make sense, people? It's simple mathematics. Let me know if
Yes,
I'm going fast. So that is what the birth rate per capita means. Here we do not have to worry about total number of births and then the total number of population. Whatever is the number of population, if we know that what is the per capita rate of growth, we can just figure out that per capita for that population and add to it. Same we can do for death rate per capita. Do you understand why we are taking per capita here? Because whatever is the number of n, this model will work for all numbers, even if it is small and where you can count it, even if it is very large where you cannot count it. Make sense?
yes, sir.
And we will take, so when we figure out about growth, it is basically change. What is growth or population growth? Growth can be negative and positive. Now in science, do not think that growth is always positive. Even if it is negative growth, it means population will decline. If it is a positive growth, population will expand. So it is change in n, correct? Per unit time, which is t. And whenever we have to find change in n per unit time, in mathematics we use an expression called dn by dt, where d is delta, also represented as this. So you must have, those who have maths must have seen dn by dt, correct? Something like this expression. Is this making sense, people? Delta denotes change. Okay, change from the initial value. Whatever are we starting with? In physics also you might be solving these kind of problems. ds by dt is change in distance. Let's say s is the distance. So change in distance per unit time is
Velocity.
yes, change in distance per unit time is speed. Change in displacement per unit time is velocity, because velocity is a vector quantity, it has a direction. Speed is a scalar quantity, it has just magnitude and not direction. So for speed we take distance, and for velocity we take displacement. Make sense? Yes, no, say something.
Yes.
Yeah. So dn by dt, what do you think for this n, the change d by dt of this n will be equal to n, which is the initial population, into what we did into here, 130 into 20. Why did we do that? Because 20 was the birth rate per capita. Birth rate per capita minus death rate per capita. Is it clear? That will be the change. Is it clear, everyone?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Now let me take this whole thing, this whole factor as R. Like we did above, we took the whole factor as X just to simplify. So whatever will be this change, we will call it R. Let's say the birth was, the factor was 1 minus 0.4 when we write it as decimal. So it will be, R will be 0.6. So N into 0.6. Do you understand? So whatever is this change, we call it R. And now dn or d by dt of n will become Rn. Make sense? Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
So can you now see that what is this R actually deciding? It is actually deciding the population growth, right? Whether if R is positive, you will multiply it with n. If R is more than 1, sorry, not positive. If R is more than 1, you will multiply it with n, and then dn by dt will be more than n, which means population is increasing. If R is less than 1, then you will multiply with n, whatever number it is, it will be less, right? Less than n. So dn by dt will be less than n. So the population is declining. So R basically is called intrinsic growth rate. Intrinsic growth rate. If we can find the R for any population, tiger population, whatever you are doing your ecological research on or you want to know, you just have to find the R for that population, and then you multiply it with the population you want to begin with, and you will get to know that over time the population will increase or decrease. Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So R has to be more than 1 for that. So it is also known as intrinsic growth rate, or it's called intrinsic rate of increase or natural increase. It can also decrease, by the way, I told you. So cool. So this is clear, right?
Yes.
Now let's try to figure out a graph. Let's say we make a graph of this population growth, which is an exponential growth. What will be on the y-axis? N, right? What is N? Population density, correct? And what should be on the x-axis? Time. This is called N versus T graph. Population density versus time graph. Sorry. What happened? Okay, cool. N versus T graph. Okay. So for a exponentially growing population, as time will increase, the population density will first be slow, like from 1 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 8, but 8 to 16, 16 to 32, and it will start going up like this. Correct?
Yes, sir.
So this is called, so at one point of time with very less time increasing. So let's see here. So till here, it was more or so it was like time was also increasing to make increase in the number. But after a point, you see that time is not increasing very much, right? But you see very greater increase in the population size. You understand, people?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so this kind of growth is exponential growth, and we have to make certain assumptions. So do you think this kind of growth is sustainable in nature? Because here you see that there is no limit for this. So this line is denoting exponential growth. Dn by dt is equal to Rn, where this R is positive. Sorry, where this R is a positive integer, and it will keep increasing or it will keep increasing the n every time in every generation or every time frame. So this kind of J-shaped curve is for exponential growth. Okay. So exponential or geometric growth gives a J-shaped curve when we plot n versus t graph. Write down. Just remember, these things are asked in entrances. Exponential growth or geometric growth. Both terms are used for the same. So it gives a J-shaped curve for a n versus t graph. Draw this and write in the chat when you're done. Is it done, people?
1 minute, sir. Done, sir.
Okay. But there is some issue with this kind of a population growth. It does happen, like in nature, you will find exponential growths happening, but you will find exponential growth happening majorly in unchecked populations where the resources are unlimited. You all understand this? Because see, to keep increasing in number, these organisms, whatever they are multiplying. For that, they need energy. For energy, they need food. So you cannot keep multiplying organisms, because after one point of time, whatever environment they are living in, the resources will go scarce, right? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
And geometric, so if you like for Atif, who has maths, so you must you must know the basic calculus. So this kind of dn by dt is equal to Rn. If I now say, because here n is what we say, n is the initial population. Now let's say I want to drive the same thing in terms of calculus. So dn by dt, which is change in n, is equal to r dot n, where the n and both these n are same. But if you know, suppose I want to remove this d by dt thing, I have to drive it into a calculus. So you must be knowing through basic calculus. You know that what is natural log, everyone? Natural log?
Yes, sir.
Yes, what is natural log, Hatif? It's denoted as e and its value is 2.71. Okay. So what we do to remove this is called differential equation. What is called? So if I convert it, where now the parameters will be, I'm taking n t. So this dn by dt, let's say n at time t, is equal to initial population, which is n naught, n at time 0, into e raised to power rt. This is the form, basic form, the integral form. So this is the differential form, and this is the integral form of the same equation of exponential growth population. Write down, this is differential form. Differentiation and integration. You don't have to go into detail of it, but just know that here this e is the base of the natural log. So let me write it for you. What is nt? Nt is population density after t time, or after time t. So you want to figure out what will happen after 2 years. So nt here will be what happened after 2 years. So whatever was the initial population into e, which is, so n naught is initial population, or you can also write population at time 0, at time 0, which means when you began studying the population. R, you all know, it is the same thing, intrinsic growth rate, or intrinsic rate of natural increase, as the book says. It's called intrinsic growth rate. And E is the base of natural log. Okay. The value of E is written here, 2.7. So you understood what is the integral form and what is the differential form? Now there are many assumptions for this kind of a growth. Even if you can apply this on an elephant's population, it will work the same. But it will take a very long time, but it will work. But does it ever happen in nature that any organism or any population keeps on expanding in a geometric fashion or exponential? No, right? It always stops at a point and starts declining from there onward. Do I make sense? Do I make sense, or is it not clear?
Clear, sir.
Clear? Right. So you can write down here, for exponential growth, the resources are assumed to be unlimited. The resources are assumed to be unlimited. Okay. and the population growth is under no checks. And the population growth is under no checks. And R value is positive and more than 1, which means intrinsic growth rate is positive and more than 1. If it is 1, it is a stable population. It will always be NT will be same as N naught at every time point. Less than 1, it is a declining population. R value more than 1 is a increasing, expanding population. Make sense, everyone?
Yes, sir.
So what kind of population you normally see, what kind of population growth you normally see in nature then? So in nature, things cannot continuously keep growing forever because there are checks and balances. And these checks and balances most often are the resource constraints. So hence there is a other growth model, which is called logistic growth model. Oh, what's the time? Are we running out of time? Oh, we have just 6 minutes. What the? Okay, let me try. So other is logistic growth model. Now we will assume the same things, but here we will assume that it's more realistic in nature that no population of any species in the wild or in the nature has unlimited resources to permit exponential growth of that population. There are always checks and balances. If it is deer, if you give unlimited grass to the deer, first of all, grass is not unlimited, but if you let's assume that the grass is unlimited, but still there are predators to keep their population in check and balances. There are diseases that populations often undergo, and then their the population size decreases. There are many kinds of other things that add to the limit for that population. And there is something known as that limit in nature, which is set by resource constraint, presence of predators, everything is called carrying capacity. Okay, carrying capacity is the maximum number of population density for that given species nature can hold. Okay, nothing can just be unlimited and survive. Okay, so because only the fittest will survive, no? Correct? Fittest will survive and reproduce. Some will always get eliminated from the population which are not the fittest. Simple logic. So logistic growth again takes into consideration the same thing, dn by dt, the differential equation, change in n. This time it's r into n. So till here it is the exponential growth. Everyone agrees?
Yes, sir.
But now I introduce something which is 1 minus n over k. K here is carrying capacity. K here is carrying capacity. Okay, if you solve it, you will get t over dt of n as r into n into k minus n upon k. Right? I just solved it. Where again, right, where n, you know what is it? You will write population density after time t, and we do not have a n naught. We don't need an n naught here. R, you could also write here as n naught, same thing. R is equal to intrinsic growth rate or intrinsic rate of natural increase, and K, as I already told you, is carrying capacity. So this inclusion of carrying capacity, this is population density at or after time t. Okay, now this inclusion will allow us to make it more realistic in nature. So let's say now if I try to plot the graph where there is n versus t graph, the same. This time it will increase to some extent and then it will reach a saturation. Okay, this is true. And the point where it reached saturation, beyond which it cannot go, is the K, carrying capacity. So K is the number of individuals or the population density that can be sustained in nature. Is that clear, everyone? So this is a S-shaped graph. And this is for dn by dt is equal to r into n, k minus n upon k. 1 minus n upon k is the, it is solved. So it gives a S-shaped graph, or it's called a sigmoid. So logistic growth model gives you a sigmoidal graph, whereas exponential growth model or geometric growth model gives you a J-shaped graph. Is that clear, everyone?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So which one is more realistic and is followed in nature, logistic or exponential?
Logistic.
Logistic. Okay, so these are the two growth models. Pay some attention, revise it at home, and let me know if you have any issues in the next class. So let's stop here with that growth models. And in the next class, I'll also give you some calculations to figure out the growth rate, carrying capacity, how to find carrying capacity if other things are given. It's just mathematics. So try doing it yourself as well at home. Okay, try to solve some problems and figure out carrying capacity K, R,